Do you like to take naps?
Do you think naps are important?
Or are you suffering from the grind culture?
Hello, I'm David Denny,
I'm Tessa Bilecki.
and this is Fire and Light.
Conversations about life, love, and soul. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Hard to believe it's June.
Yes.
Summer will be upon us. The summer solstice is coming. And I just can't resist beginning with the line of a poem that I learned in the 6th grade. That's 1956, folks. And what is so rare as a day in June?
Who wrote that?
That was by James Russell Lowell, a poet from Massachusetts who wrote in the late 1800s. And when I was in the 6th grade, God bless Mrs. Tarrant, I can still see her face and her dyed red hair. And I loved 6th grade. And one of the things she had us do is every single month we had to memorize a poem. And then each one in the class had to get up in front of the class and recite it from memory. And that was when I fell in love with poetry and also just learned how to memorize, which is a great skill. And I don't remember the whole poem, although we are going to use that for our meditation today, but I never forgot that first line. And what is so rare as a day in June? And the next line of the poem is, then if ever come perfect days. And we all have memories of the perfect days of June and summer when school has let out. How about you, Dave? What were your summers like as a kid?
Well, I was very lucky because we, as a family, went on vacations. And that's such an amazing part of being young for me. So typically, I grew up in Indiana, so we would take turns. One year we might go up to Michigan, where there are these gorgeous lakes. You know, every lake in Indiana was muddy and brown. But in Michigan, they had these deep glacial lakes that had been carved out, and the water was just crystal clear. And I remember we would swim out to a raft, and on one side of the raft, the water might have been 8 or 10 feet deep. You could see right down to the bottom. And on the other side of the raft, it was bottomless. You just saw this deep turquoise, and you'd jump down into that and you'd feel like you were, going into outer space or something. So those were wonderful days of just being in the water. And then we would eat lots of cherries because they were big in Michigan. We'd go to the cherry hut. I even remember, talk about memorizing stuff. I memorized the weirdest things. So this was on the menu for the cherry hut. Cherry Jerry, the cherry pie-faced boy, welcomes you. So anyway, so then the next time we went on vacation, sometimes we'd go down to Florida, which was very different in the late 50s, early 60s than it is now. And my brother and I, it was hot, of course, but we were just underwater all day. We were trying to learn to do things like surf. We even went scuba diving one time. So
Wow.
They were great adventures. I can't describe the excitement we would feel. My brother and I would try to be the first to see the ocean, because coming from Indiana, that was just a miracle.
Yeah. Now, ocean, that would be a big part of my summers growing up. We did not take family vacations, and I'm going to say why that was, because there's a bit of a tragedy involved in that. But we would go to the beach. So summer meant school's out and it's time for the beach. We did not take family vacations, and this relates to the poem by James Russell Lowell, which I had not looked at for decades. And as we approached June, I Googled it, and I was quite stunned to read the full poem. And we only memorized the first verse or part of the first verse. And when I looked at the rest of the poem, I was quite stunned by how he refers to grief, sorrow, the ache in our hearts, but he doesn't address any of that. What he talks about is when June comes, when summer comes, it's perfect days, happy days. We have no sorrow, we have no grief. And I found myself getting angry about that actually, because I also remembered that it was in June that my youngest brother died. I was about to turn 18, but my younger brother and sister were only 11 and 12. Our 8-year-old brother died. He was a Down syndrome child, and he died of leukemia on June 4th. And I thought, wow, you read Lowell's poem and everything is happy go lucky. It's as though nothing bad is ever going to happen in life. And I started thinking about how do we prepare children for the pain in life? I don't have an answer to that question. I know I was not prepared for it. And so, and the reason we didn't go on family vacations is that we had this Down syndrome member of our family who took a lot of care, and we celebrated summer at home. It was always great. I loved summers.
Clamming, right?
Clamming. That's a huge summer memory for me is going clamming with my whole extended family. That was a big part of our summer, and then we'd bring all the clams home and all the relatives would come over and we'd eat nothing but clams for a whole Sunday. Boy, do I miss those days. But when we do this poem as a meditation, pay attention to how Lowell brings in the idea of sorrow, the idea of grief, the idea that all is not always well. And I guess I'd love to hear from those of you who are listening, those of you who have children. I know who many of you are. I can see your faces. Mark and Sarah and Joe and Sarah, I can see your children's faces. How do we prepare our kids for the fact that life is going to bring pain, not just the joy of a summer vacation? But now let's get back to this is just a way of introducing our theme, introducing the idea of summer as a time of rest, summer as a time of leisure, summer as a time of celebration, of daydreaming, of taking it easy. What song is that? The lazy, crazy, hazy days of summer. Let me introduce it by telling you that the other day, taking my morning walk, I saw a woman running, and she was wearing a t-shirt which said, "Grind, sleep, repeat."
Whoa.
Pretty grim. I'm hoping that was a protest t-shirt, a resistance t-shirt, because Dave, tell us about, we know there's a new book out called Rest as Resistance, and it's a protest against what the author is calling the grind culture.
Yes, it's actually Rest is Resistance, and it's by a woman named Tricia Hersey. And she calls herself the Nap Bishop, which I think is great. And she says she discovered the power of rest and napping when she was overworked. She was going to seminary, actually. She had a child to take care of. She was having trouble paying the bills. And she was exhausted all the time. And her great resistance was just to stop.
So she was suffering from exhaustion. All of us know what that feels like. She has something interesting to say about exhaustion. Is exhaustion an inevitable part of our lives?
No, she says it's abnormal, and we should come to grips with that this is not natural, not normal to be exhausted all the time. But there are these forces in our culture that tell us, no, you got to be exhausted, you got to be pushing harder, you got to be working harder, longer. I know you were asking Tessa about, well, where'd that idea of a grind culture come from? And I'm not sure myself, but I know that Elon Musk in 2018, so that's 5 years ago.
And remind people who he is.
He's the founder of Tesla. And he said that nobody ever changed the world on 40 hours a week. And he was referring to the 100-hour weeks that Tesla employees worked when they were producing their first car.
100 hours a week of working.
Yeah. And this is considered, this is how to be a good patriotic American.
Because we live in a capitalist culture.
Yes. And that's one of the critiques that Hersey is making, that this is pretty radical. She says, your body is a site of liberation, not exploitation. It doesn't belong to capitalism. So her point is that as a Black woman, she's lived her whole life in exhaustion. Her parents, her grandparents lived in exhaustion. And that although we made a transition out of slavery, there's something to be questioned about our attitude toward work and toward the rights of workers, and that a world that's based on the exhaustion of the worker is not a place we want to live in.
Yeah.
She says it robbed her ancestors' labor and what she calls their dream space. And I like that term, that we need a space in which to dream. And that's not impractical. We have this prejudice in our culture sometimes. Well, he's just a dreamer. But of course, when you think about someone like Dr. King, he had a dream and people died as a result. So this is not for the faint of heart.
Dream space. I can't help but think, because we are contemplatives, and that the major part of our work in the world is helping people understand what we mean by living contemplatively. She's basically talking about living a more contemplative life. Dream space is contemplative space.
Yes, I think that we were very formed by an essay called Leisure is the Basis of Culture. And I think many people feel that work is the basis of culture. Well, work is the basis of production. But if you want to talk about a culture, then I think we're talking about something that goes much deeper into the human spirit.
Yeah. And in that essay that we read, we were formed by that as young monks. It was a small book by Joseph Pieper, Leisure, the Basis of Culture. And he talks about how work is not the basis of culture. He actually emphasizes play, that you cannot have a culture without play. Now, he doesn't necessarily mean playing games, although that's part of it, but an open-ended, free-spirited, leisurely space, a dream space.
Yeah, a place to let yourself imagine. I think imagination is a big word, and I think that often the grind culture damages our ability to imagine. And so we just say, well, this is the way it is. God made it this way. This is how the world works, and I can't imagine it being any different.
So since you brought God into it, is there anything about the grind culture in the Bible?
Yes, I think if you pay attention, there's a lot. Walter Brueggemann, who's a great theologian I like, talked about this one time, and he's written about how we're basically still living in the world of the Pharaoh. And what did the Pharaoh say to the Jews? You are lazy, lazy. And this is a form of, I know a modern term for it would be gaslighting. You are under my control, and I'm going to tell you how you feel and who you are and what you mean in this world.
That's what gaslighting means. I'm going to tell you how you feel.
Here's a definition from Christy Pichicero. Consolidating one's power by causing individuals to question their own judgments, perceptions of reality, and memories has a name: gaslighting, a form of psychological manipulation by which abusers build their authority and ability to continue to abuse by breaking down their victim's sense of self and their confidence in their grip on reality. So when Pharaoh says you're lazy, there's a danger you might start to believe it. And so I got to work harder. I got to make myself more successful. I got to get those 100 hours of work in. And that's who I am.
I'm glad you said, and that's who I am, because so many people identify themselves with their work. You are at a social event and you're meeting someone for the first time, and you introduce yourself and you say, well, who are you? And they very often will say what they do in the world, what their job is.
It's a very American thing, I've heard. Yes. So what happens in the Bible is that this young radical man named Moses, basically when Pharaoh says you're lazy, he says, no, we're out of here. And that's it. They just walk out on the system. And it happens at a great price. And yet they learn in the desert about another way of being, which has to do with solidarity, taking good care of one another. And then a beautiful transformation took place. So.
Yeah, I think part of what we're talking about here is that we are human beings.
Yes.
We are not human doings, and we are not human machines.
It's a radical thing in our tradition is that a word that we don't use enough these days. It's called divinization, that the human being is created in the image of God, and that life should bring us not to be bigger producers, but to be participants in the love and the kindness, the justice, the compassion of God. So that's a very different way of looking at the world and participating in the world.
So how can we tell that the grind culture has got us in its grip?
Well, I actually went to a website called leaders.com, and they gave me a list. Answering work emails and phone calls at any hour of the day. It used to be you're on call for 8 hours, and after that, you've got your family, you've got your friends, and you go for a walk in the evening. Those days are gone. Being punished or criticized for taking time off, feeling obliged to choose work over family, losing passions and interests outside of work.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Pushing yourself beyond your boundaries, becoming addicted. This is, addicted to work. And of course, there's a lot of discussion about addiction to digital life. For example, phones. Pushing friends and family away because of your work, missing personal events, and thinking you never have enough time for friends and family. So if you answer yes to any of those, it's time to take a nap.
Yeah, I have to confess that even as a monk, as a so-called professional contemplative, there have been seasons in my life when I would answer yes to a lot of those questions. Guilty as charged. I think it isn't only about having a 9-to-5 job and somebody else as a boss or a pharaoh telling you what to do. We internalize all this. It's in our minds. Sometimes
Yes.
as I'm struggling with this, I tell myself, Tess, you're your own worst enemy. You're the one who made these rules. You're the one who's pushing yourself. Nobody from the outside is pushing you. It's an inner compulsion.
Yeah, it's a form maybe we could call it brainwashing, or it's sometimes today I've heard people call it colonization. Your own being has been colonized.
Colonized by capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
Colonized by the capitalist system.
Mm-hmm. Which is about extraction and not nurturing not moving toward that world of solidarity, communion, celebration.
Yeah, celebration. I love how our friend, our Benedictine monk friend, Brother David Steindl-Rast, describes contemplation. And one of the descriptions of contemplation is the celebration of what is too good to be used. It seems like our capitalist system is all about using. Part of why we have this neurotic compulsion to work is because we're living in a utilitarian society that says that only what's useful is valuable.
Mm-hmm.
So not engaging in something useful, simply celebrating, is not valued in the culture. But as human beings, that's what we want.
Yeah.
We're made to celebrate.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big part of leisure, is the basis of culture. The author of that essay talked a lot about that the Greek gods wanted us to celebrate, wanted us to celebrate the goodness of life, the love that we share. And how about naps?
Getting back to naps.
Getting back to naps. You're a big napper.
I'm a believer and a practitioner. Yeah, I usually after lunch most days I take a half-hour nap and I feel revivified and it's ready to start over. I think it's important to distinguish, though, sometimes between what we mean by leisure and recharging. It's you don't rest just to then go back and get more work done. And some other time we'll probably talk about the Sabbath, because that would be another aspect of this reality of leisure, that you don't want to only be recharging. There's
in order to go back to work.
Right. There's another aspect of rest that has to do with, it's an end in itself. It's what life is all about. And she, Tricia Hersey, says we need to make space for daydreaming, for example.
Also, Brother David makes a beautiful distinction between purpose and meaning.
Yes.
And that work has a purpose, which means it has an end, because once the purpose is achieved, the work is done. Whereas play or celebration or poetry is about meaning, and it is worthwhile in itself, which is what you were just saying. We don't have leisure, we don't rest in order to recharge, in order to go back to work, because the rest, the leisure, the play is meaningful in itself, which also means it can go on and on and on. It doesn't have an end, because it's not like purpose, which once achieved is done with. I interrupted you. What were you going to say more about daydreaming?
Well, I think some people, for example, if you can't nap, and people, some of us just
and
can't.
that would be me.
That you and I talk about, sometimes you just need to sit and stare. And to me, that's the time for daydreaming, where you're not having to focus on this or that. You're kind of more like listening to life, to what's going on inside you, those feelings, thoughts that sometimes you say, well, I don't have time to think of that, or I don't have time to feel or deal with that. Take some space, look out the window. I know I've seen studies in which if you're looking at a wall, your metabolism is doing one thing. If you look out a window at a horizon, your physiology shifts. So if you've got access to a window and a horizon, the sky, you'll find that something will shift in you physically as well as metaphysically and psychologically.
Yeah, I would really like to know more about that. My desk here in the apartment where I live faces a wall. I cannot sit there and work. Yes. So I set up a temporary card table in front of my window, because I instinctually have to look out of a window. I cannot sit and face a wall. So that's fascinating to me. I also want to say, so I know when you take a nap, you go to sleep. I take that kind of time often I don't sleep, but my eyes are closed. I'm resting. I shut down my mind. I pray the Jesus prayer or I use a mantra, and I just try to stop everything
Mhm.
in a kind of leisurely space. I like that you're calling it daydreaming. Bring back daydreaming. We need to dream more.
Mhm. Yeah, I think we're sometimes in a trance or in a spell, and we need to break the trance, break the spell, and that's where daydreaming comes in. We sometimes think of it as irresponsible, but it's a deep need of the spirit.
Yeah, it feeds the soul.
Mhm.
You know, these are conversations about life, love, and soul. What feeds the soul? This kind of time, taking this kind of time and space, feeds the soul. I know most people ask the question, how can I find time to play in the middle of my work, in the midst of my
Yeah.
work, in my busy work life? And I know that in these last few years, the question has, for the most part, changed for me. And the question has become, how can I, as a woman of leisure, get my work done? Because I find more and more, it's part of the luxury of aging, I think, that I want to just sit and be and uh, enjoy leisure, but I do have work to do. So how am I going to get my work done in this realm of leisure that I am trying to live in? I also would like to, let's come back to Brother David again. He also has a tremendously helpful description of leisure. And he says, leisure is not the privilege of those who have the time, but the virtue of those who make the time.
Mhm.
And I think that's what Tricia Hersey is on about.
Yes, you deserve this.
You deserve it. It's your human right.
And I mentioned earlier about divinization as was a big theme in early Christians and amongst the mystics. And she makes a big point that, you are already divine. You don't have to work to earn it. You don't have to get a merit badge to say you're important or you're significant. You are because you exist. And so what do you need? And honor what you need. And most of us need to dream, and we need some rest.
So our practice then on this podcast, we like to suggest a practice to begin to incorporate in your life after the podcast and work on it or practice it throughout the month. And so the practice this month would be take a nap.
Yeah, it's great. Right at the beginning of her book, Tricia Hersey says, I hope you're reading this lying down.
Yeah.
Great attitude.
Perfect. So after this podcast, take a nap.
Amen.
Sit and look out the window.
Mm-hmm.
Incorporate more time and space for daydreaming in your life, not only today, but throughout this month. And we hope as the beginning of a lifetime practice. And our meditation today is going to be a recitation of Lowell's poem about the beauty of a day in June. And part of what amuses me about it is he's obviously a New Englander. He obviously comes from the Northeast. All the visuals and the sounds are Northeastern sounds. It's not the desert. It's not the Southwestern desert. And I think we should also tell everybody that June is a very difficult month here in Arizona. We actually talk about having 5 seasons, and the month of June is its own season, and it's the toughest season. We call it dry summer because it's very hot and the monsoons have not yet come. So it's extremely dry, and we actually have winter, spring, dry summer, summer, which tends to be wet summer because of the monsoons, and then autumn. And
so there's a certain almost dread about the summer solstice in this part of the world.
In this part of the world, yes, but not in most people's worlds, and certainly not for James Russell Lowell. So set our tone, Dave, as we move into our meditation for our June podcast.
So, as our custom is, take a moment to find a posture that works for you. It might be lying down or sitting up a little straighter than usual, but comfortably, so that you stay alert. And take a few moments just to breathe deeply. Leave aside those anxieties, those worries you may have, and allow yourself some time to listen.
And what is so rare as a day in June? Then, if ever, come perfect days. Then heaven tries earth, if it be in tune, and over it softly her warm ear lays.
Whether we look or whether we listen, we hear life murmur or see it glisten. Every clod feels a stir of might, an instinct within it that reaches and towers, and, groping blindly above it for light, climbs to a soul in grass and flowers.
The flush of life may well be seen thrilling back over hills and valleys, the cowslip starlets in meadows green, the buttercup catches the sun in its chalice, and there's never a leaf nor a blade too mean to be some happy creature's palace.
The little bird sits at his door in the sun, atilt like a blossom among the leaves, and lets his illumined being o'errun with the deluge of summer it receives.
His mate feels the eggs beneath her wings, and the heart in her dumb breast flutters and sings. He sings to the wide world, and she to her nest. In the nice ear of nature, which song is the best?
Now is the high tide of the year, and whatever of life hath ebbed away comes flooding back with a ripply cheer into every bare inlet and creek and bay.
Now the heart is so full that a drop overfills it. We are happy now because God wills it. No matter how barren the past may have been, 'tis enough for us now that the leaves are green.
We sit in the warm shade and feel right well how the sap creeps up and the blossoms swell. We may shut our eyes, but we cannot help knowing that skies are clear and grass is growing. The breeze comes whispering in our ear. that dandelions are blossoming near, that maize has sprouted, that streams are flowing, that the river is bluer than the sky, that the robin is plastering his house hard by.
And if the breeze kept the good news back, for our couriers we should not lack. We could guess it all by yon heifer's lowing, and hark! How clear bold Chanticleer, warmed with the new wine of the year, tells all in his lusty crowing.
Joy comes, grief goes, we know not how. Everything is happy now. Everything is upward striving. 'Tis as easy now for the heart to be true as for grass to be green or skies to be blue. 'Tis for the natural way of living.
Who knows whither the clouds have fled? In the unscarred heaven they leave no wake, and the eyes forget the tears they have shed. The heart forgets its sorrow and ache. The soul partakes the season's youth, and the sulphurous rifts of passion and woe lie deep 'neath a silence pure and smooth, like burnt-out craters healed with snow. Thank you for listening. Do check out our websites, tessabalecki.com,
sandandsky.org.
and especially on my website, I've posted an essay that begins with a meditation on this poem, but it addresses the sorrow and the ache and the fact that our days might not be quite so perfect, might not be quite so happy. So check that out. And if you like our websites, if you enjoy this podcast, press that donation button.
You'll find it at sandandsky.org
and tessabalecki.com.
You've been listening to Fire and Light.
Share this with a friend. Our conversations about life, love, and soul.
The background music for Fire and Light is The Day We Met, composed and performed by Ricky Zhao.
Fire and Light's theme music is Dreamcatcher, composed and performed by Chris Martin and Jeff Harvey at Purple Planet Music.
Fire and Light is recorded in Tucson, Arizona, editing by David Levin.